Hello. I just have one question. Who's excited? We are honored to have you here today, Steve Wozniak. This is basically, I was just talking about, we're the largest college of engineering in the country. We have fantastic students and faculty. Steve, we have a couple notes here, a man who truly needs no introduction, but a couple things to point out. Of course, an icon from Silicon Valley, philanthropist for the past 3 decades. He helped shape the computing industry with his design of Apple's first line of products, the Apple I and II, that influenced the popular Mac. In 1976, Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs founded Apple Computer, and it was Steve Wozniak's Apple I personal computer that was basically the basis of the company. The following year, he introduced his Apple II personal computer, featuring a central processing unit, a keyboard, color graphics, disk drive, and so forth, and really basically launching the personal computer industry. Okay, so basically a real pioneer. For his achievements at Apple Computer, Steve was awarded the National Medal of Technology by the President in 1985. That's the highest honor bestowed on America's leading innovators. He was inducted in the year 2000 into the Innovators Hall of Fame, was awarded the prestigious Heinz Award for Technology, the Economy, and Employment for single-handedly designing the first personal computer, and then for redirecting his lifelong passion for mathematics and electronics toward lighting the fires of excitement for education in grade school students and teachers. Left Apple in 1985, involved in many business and film ventures. He founded the Electronic Frontier Foundation, founding sponsor of the Tech Museum, Silicon Valley Ballet, and Children's Discovery Museum in San Jose. Could go on and on. As a fantastic published author with the release of his New York Times best-selling autobiography, I Was, Computer Geek, the cult icon in 2006. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Steve Wozniak.
One administrative issue here. You're going to be speaking, and then you're going to be taking questions, correct?
Yes.
And I believe, Steve, you've agreed to have photographs taken with you, is that correct?
Afterwards, yes.
Yeah, afterwards.
Yep.
So
And
all we
photographs in
ask
my
is
thumb.
for an orderly process when we do that. But we're going to open it up to questions after Steve tells his story. And it's probably not a story, it's not the story you think it is, but it's the real story from the real deal. And without further ado, the Woz.
Okay. When I grew up, nobody ever thought they would see or touch a computer in their life. And they were things in movies, and they were in places called research. And I got involved early on in engineering, analog engineering. Some of you have even take that here to these days. A lot of mathematics. So I was getting all the math awards at my schools, and I was the electronics star, and I could design all this stuff. And I stumbled into computers by accident. About 9 or 10 years old, found a journal. You could never get a book that described what is inside of computers, what makes them work. And I found a book, and it talked about ones and zeros and switches and lights and logic that make decisions. And I said, oh my gosh, I'll never do this in my life, but this is my passion. Because a 5th grader can understand all this computer logic stuff, Boolean algebra and all that. You don't need higher level mathematics. That's analog engineering. So I was really good at both. I decided early on in life I was going to be an engineer, told my father, I want to be an engineer like you, electrical engineer. And second, I want to be a school teacher, because my father had taught me how important schooling was to my future. Someday I would be able to get a job and have money and have a house and a family. And if I didn't go to school, I wouldn't have these things. So I really respected all my teachers and thought highly of them all through my life. And like I said, I was the math whiz, I was the electronics whiz, the computer whiz. In high school, we didn't have computers, but we had a great teacher, a teacher that saw beyond the boundaries of the school. He would get companies to contribute parts. We built up our lab. We built up test equipment in the early years of my high school. I was there about the 3rd year, and we had oscilloscopes and signal generators, meters, and all that stuff, power supplies. So we were ready for his lesson. His teacher wrote his lessons himself. He didn't grab a book and say, you're in chapter 1 today, we're in chapter 2 next week. He wrote the lessons knowing where our head was at, where our equipment was at that we could use to learn. It was a better course than any of the local colleges. But he went to the outside. He got companies to donate parts that we could use. And about once a year, he took a bright student. I had my turn when I was in electronics, and he put them out in a company to actually be there and learn how they build things. And I got to go down and program this thing called a computer. Oh my gosh. My first program was the Knight's Tour of Chess, where a knight piece has to hit every square exactly once, and kind of it got no answer. Like I bounced the knight around and then backed up and tried a different route and backed up and tried a different route, backtracking algorithm. No answer came out. And I studied my program and came to the conclusion it was going to get every possible answer in 10 to the 27th years. What that meant was a computer that could do 1 million things a second. No human could ever match that. 1 million things a second. A computer still can't solve a problem without an approach, an algorithm that comes from some kind of human intuition. So the human brain versus the computer was really going to be a lot of my thinking throughout my entire life to this day. Anyway, somehow I discovered a manual that described the architecture of a computer. Spaces that held numbers, called registers, operations to add them and OR them and mix them up and all, and transfer them in and out of memory. I said, what if I went back to my elementary school science fair projects that were huge and won all these great awards, and they used logic gates, things called logic gates that make decisions. What if, could I figure out what logic gates would make this computer? Seeing the architecture. I sat down and it took me weeks or months. I struggled and struggled like you do when you're trying to learn something that there's no book on. You're trying to figure out how to do it. You're writing a book yourself. And eventually I kind of designed the processor of a computer called the PDPA. And then eventually I found a way to order all the manuals from all the computers being made. The top research center in the United States, Stanford Linear Accelerator Center, where all the brightest physicists worked, I could drive down on a Sunday, and the brightest people in the world don't lock doors. So I could always get into the main building, the library. They had a technical library with books you could never find in a bookstore. And I could pull out computer magazines and order manuals to be sent to me. So I got manuals for all the Hewlett-Packard computers, the IBM computers, digital equipment computers, Varian computers, Data General computers. I got the manuals sent to me, and every weekend I would close my door and sit down and design, getting better and better and better, what chips, what pieces of lumber would build this computer. And I made up a game. Since I wasn't getting graded, I wasn't telling anybody, didn't have any friends that did it, I didn't get any money, I didn't have a salary. The game that I made up was, how can I do a better job than I did last week? How can I design the same computer with fewer parts? Put your brain through, what if I try this, try all these different things, and every once in a while, oh my gosh, I figured out a way to save parts. I made one part do 2 things at once, or a new chip that came out, cut my part count down. Don't ask me why I did it. I didn't have any, I couldn't justify it and say there's a reason to design it with fewer parts. It's just a game with myself. I was competing with myself. So I got very good at having all these tricks of ways that I saved parts that weren't in any books. And better yet, I had ways to make up new tricks. I always made my own tricks. I didn't read them anywhere. I never once saw a book on computer designs. And here I was in high school designing any computer in the world in 2 days. And I had 800s on all my SATs, math and science SATs. And, but I'm very lucky that my parents let me always follow your heart. Having fun in life is much more important than absolutely, be successful and here's your plan and what college you should go to. I flew my first time out of California to a college in Colorado, and that night it snowed, and I'd never been in snow in my life. You guys might relate to that. And it was so much fun out there in our underwear throwing snowballs at each other, myself and 2 friends. That was the only school I would apply to. Back in those days, Introduction to Computers was a college course. It was graduate level. And I was allowed to take it because I was in engineering. And I was going to be for engineers my whole life. Engineering is a type of truth you can't deny. A product works or it doesn't work. And I was in engineering, so I took the course and I got an A+. And I wrote every program I could think of to calculate the numbers that scientists use, physicists, chemists, mathematicians, and things like Fibonacci number tables, and it'd print out 60 pages at a time, and then rerun the program and print the next 60 pages, the next 60 pages. You got to where the numbers were a whole page. And I was reams and reams of output piling up in my dorm room. They cut me off. Turns out, I thought because I was in a programming class, I can write programs. Turns out there was a thing called a budget. I ran our class 5 times over budget. Far more than out-of-state tuition, probably about $50,000 of today's dollars. You can see how scared I was about that. So I didn't try to go back to that school I loved so much, so many experiences, learning bridge. Electronics should be fun, built a TV jammer, and I could jam a TV, and then people would go up and try to fix it, and I could make their bodies go the way I wanted to. One time I got a guy to stand on a chair with the antenna in the air, and for 2 weeks they would station somebody in a chair by the TV. Whenever the TV went bad, hit it till it works, or twist the dial till it works. And it works, pull your hand away, it doesn't work. So I started manipulating people's bodies. I should have gotten a psychology degree, almost did. One time I got a guy holding his hand in the middle of a TV, foot in the air. If he put his foot down, it went bad. He turned to the audience, and if he moved his hand off the TV, it went bad. So he turned to the audience and he said, "It's a grounding effect." So I had a lot of other great experiences that way. One time, but not enough time to get my book. You can read more of these. But my real prank book is going to be the next one I write, and I might write it this year. Might finally get to. Okay, so I'm going along through college. By the time I got to my 3rd year of college, I took 1 year off. I took 1 year off to earn the money for a 4-year college, which was housing and a car. And because we had no tuition at Berkeley, University of California, for a California resident, no tuition in those days. Compare that to today. And I worked, I had a car, and I went to school at Berkeley, and I only took graduate courses in hardware and software design, and I made the dean's list, and time of my life, doing what I wanted to do. I would buy a book on a Thursday in the bookstore, once I knew my class, once they had the book. And I would do every single answer to every question in every chapter, and I would get halfway through the book by the time class started on Monday. Why would anyone do that? It's your passion. If you love computers, you want to learn everything about them, you'll just do it. It doesn't matter. It's not really for the grade or for some acknowledgement or a salary. So I had a great time. Now, it turns out that after that year at Berkeley, because I totaled my car, a great story that's in my book, the night we met Captain Crunch with blue boxes, little devices that if you put tones into an American phone, you could dial a call anywhere in the world for free. Who would believe the phone company in the United States worked that way? You could just put in tones, beep, 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 the right tones, and dial calls anywhere for free. So security always comes last in our thinking, as we well know. So I lost my car, so I said, I'm gonna take another year off to earn the money for my 4th year of college, to pay the dorm and all that. And then my career started going up. I was designing one thing after another. But the first time that I took a year off to earn money for college, that was when an executive heard that I could design computers. And he said, "Did you ever build one?" "No, you can't build it if you don't have money. And those parts called chips, they cost a fortune back then." He said he had connections to chip companies. If I designed a computer, he'd get me the chips. And so he did, and I built this computer. And a friend that I built it with, we'd ride our bikes down and get cream soda and build up the computer. We were young. And he introduced me to Steve Jobs. See, and Steve Jobs also likes to play pranks at the high school. I was well known for it. And Steve Jobs likes electronics. He didn't really understand it like an engineer, but he understood it like a technician. You know, he could follow diagrams and look at voltages and that sort of thing. So we became really good friends. The first day I met Steve Jobs, what's important? Important things are your concepts of life. And we shared a lot of views. We were in the counterculture era of the Bay Area. Steve was more like a true hippie with eating beads and walking in bare feet and doing drugs. And I wasn't that way. I had my feet on the ground. I could always, right out of high school, I would have a good job as an engineer my whole life. So, but I took him down, the first day I met him, I took him down to my house. He didn't have albums. And I showed him the liner notes and the lyrics of the Bob Dylan songs. Whoa, introduced him to songs like Subterranean Homesick Blues and a whole bunch of really great ones. Desolation Row. So we became Bob Dylan freaks. We went to a lot of concerts. We bought brochures and we went and visited people that had pictures and things of Dylan. That was a big part of our life. Drove Steve up to college where he went to college. Okay, you're all in college. You know how college works. I drove him up there and he showed me his list of classes and he said, they say I have to take these classes. He thought you could just take the most interesting classes you felt like, you know, on Shakespeare or Isaac Newton or something, you know, weird. And I said, no, that's how college works. The first 2 years, you gotta take their classes. And he didn't go to a single class. He just sat in a tent with his girlfriend in the dorm that week. I would have never been that brave. You know, takes some kind of independent thinking. But he can talk his way into anything, like letting friends stay in the let him stay in the dorm, and letting the university allow him to attend classes he felt like. So that was kind of cool. I'm back home, and about once a year, the blue box that made free calls was the first time Steve Jobs says we could sell it. He was always a salesman. He'd worked in surplus electronics, where you buy a part for 10 cents that you can sell for $10. He knew how to do that. And so once a year he'd come into town and see something that I was building for fun. I was doing all these projects for fun, and he would always turn them into money. One of them was my own version of Pong. After seeing Pong in a bowling alley, I did my own version because I knew I could design it with half as many chips as anyone else. I was working at Hewlett-Packard, designing the hottest product of its time without a college degree. And I had a reputation for being able to use many, many times fewer parts than anyone else for a design they were having trouble with. So Steve saw the Pong game when he came into town, and he ran it down to Atari and convinced that he had a part in designing it, and they hired him. So the trouble is he couldn't design. So he kind of acted like, here's what we should be building, but he couldn't do it himself. So he kind of came to me and got me to design in 4 days and nights a hardware game, hardware version, not software. In those days, no games were software yet. Microprocessors were not even used in games. Hardware, just little logic chips connected up with wires, and 4 days and nights designed Breakout, which many of you have played, where you hit the ball against bricks, and you break through the bricks and all that. I designed it. I didn't think I could do it in 4 days and nights. Got no sleep, got the sleeping sickness, mononucleosis, which comes from low immune system, and so did Steve, but we turned it over to Atari. But then next time, today we have an internet. You know how important the internet is to all of life. But there was no internet back then. There was a starting thing sponsored by the US military, the DARPA organization. It was called the ARPANET. And when I discovered the ARPANET, seeing a friend typing to it, there were only 6 computers in the United States on the whole ARPANET. MIT, Stanford Research Institute, UCLA, UC Santa Barbara, Utah, and somewhere else. Only 6 computers. Oh my gosh, but if I built a device that I could type in over a modem to this ARPANET, I could talk to a computer in Boston from California. And the computer in Boston then could type back to my television set if I designed things. Well, I knew all the TV signal circuits, the analog side of television electronics, and I could build any digital stuff to put anything I wanted on. So there I was with my little terminal, talking to faraway computers, and I could care less what I could do with them. I could log in as a guest, I could run programs, I could play chess, whatever I wanted, checkers with them, whatever I wanted to. And Steve Jobs came into town, and he managed to turn that one into money too, with a local time-sharing company where you call up with modems. My terminal was so inexpensive, like $300, and it would cost $3,000 for any sort of, teletype even. A video terminal cost, more than about 2 cars to have an input-output device. Input-output was the expense of computers. Using your own television at home made it free, and that conquered a barrier. Now, Steve Jobs was out up in Oregon on this commune where he lived, and I heard about a club forming for people that had television terminals like I had created, and I wanted to go off. I always loved showing off my design prowess, my engineering prowess. Even though I worked at Hewlett-Packard in the daytime on handheld scientific calculators, I loved showing it off. So I went to this club, and I discovered there was something I didn't know about. There were a bunch of kids calling themselves computers based on a microprocessor chip, whatever that was. You toggle the switches to the 1s and 0s and push buttons. And I said, wait a minute, I built that computer 5 years ago. You want to build something useful. I had told my dad I was going to own that 4K computer someday. You want 4K, the right kind of dynamic memory, made it affordable. Microprocessor, I found a microprocessor chip for $20, and I already had a terminal that I could type into to a faraway computer. Just had to make the computer local. And like our Hewlett-Packard calculators, I wrote a little program that said, what's being typed on the keyboard? And you type a letter. It says, now what's being typed next on the keyboard? You type another letter, type in a bunch of stuff, and when you hit return, it goes and runs it. That's how our calculators worked. So I took this down. We had Stanford professors and Berkeley professors in our club. We were a club of basically nobody who had made it big in business. It was just people that wanted this idea of building your own computer. We could actually have them, we could operate them, we could be more important than other people. And we're talking about the social goals. Stanford professors were talking about how you could type a message into a computer and somebody else could log into that computer and read the message, and another person could log in and read it, and over an hour, 100 people might be able to read your message. Whoa, that was an astounding number, 100 in an hour. You could really communicate things and change plans and all. Then education was going to be improved because you were going to use more than 10% of your mind once you got told immediately if your answer was right or wrong, rather than having to wait till next day's homework. And the geek who knew how to program a computer was going to be more important for the company finances at the company he worked at than their $1 million computer. You had your own computer, wrote your own programs, you'd be doing a better job, which turned out pretty true. And I wanted to help them achieve these social goals. So what I did was I gave away my design. It was a computer with 4K of memory that you could build for $300. I gave away my designs for free, hardware, software, and Steve Jobs didn't know it existed yet. So he came into town. Don't believe that movie where it shows him taking me to a computer club. He'd never been to the club. I'd been there every day. I'd passed out my computer. I had helped other people build my computer already. He didn't know it existed. So I came into town. I said, you got to come down to the club and see this. And he saw all the excitement around me, and he said, well, we should start a company to build a piece of it for $20 that we can sell for $40, called a PC board. Not to build a whole computer. We didn't have any money. We had no savings accounts. We had no business experience. We were young. That's what you have to do. And I said, I can't start a company on the side of Hewlett Packard. I love that company. That's a company that makes all the products that engineers use, test equipment for engineers. Back then, Hewlett Packard was different. And I said, I am an engineer at heart, and I'm building equipment that engineers use, and I want to be an engineer at Hewlett Packard for the rest of my life. I do not want to move up into management. I don't want to be political in any way whatsoever. And so I wouldn't leave Hewlett Packard. I proposed this personal computer to my lab manager, to my group manager, section manager, lab manager, the marketing people, and they turned me down for the first of 5 times. So good, Steve and I got to start a company. And he came up with the name Apple Computer. It was actually, I found out in later years, somebody on his commune came up to him and said, I got a great name for your company. So Apple Computer was our little start. This Apple I computer existed, but it had never been thought out by me, a designer, an engineer. I had never said, how do I build a computer? And that's what I came up with. I sat there with a terminal to talk to faraway computers in Boston, and I put the brains of it, the processor locally, and I just modified something into it. But the design that I had come up with to talk to Boston, I'm such an optimal designer, using the absolute lowest cost, smallest number of parts. It was only designed to talk over a modem at 10 to 30 characters a second max. I mean, my machine could go 60. That wasn't the computer you could build in this day of microprocessors and memory. So I sat down, and before we ever shipped an Apple I computer, we were demonstrating my Apple II. Designed it all myself, all the hardware, software, everything in it. I wrote the basic language for both computers. Never having taken a course in how to write a language, but having read a little bit. And this Apple II, one of the keys was, I said, why do you have a computer and then an output device? Input-output device is separate. Why don't you merge them and make them one and the same? And that way you don't have to have one set of memory for what's on the screen and another set of memory for the computer to do its calculations. You merge the memory all into one. And the memory, and it was so great because the memory could go 2 million operations a second. And the processor could only go 1 million a second. Well, that left an extra million for the display to go in and grab its stuff. And the processor could write something into a position in the memory, and it would pop up on the display. Next, color. When I was 4 days and nights without sleeping and my mind was drifting, I could hardly keep it straight, I thought I saw color on a machine on the Atari floor. Atari was changing the world, bringing a new industry of arcade games. They were all hardware designs, no microprocessors yet. They were all black and white. Nobody had figured out how to make an affordable color one. And I just thought color would be so sweet. And the analog forms of color television popped in my head. And then what popped in was a little $1 digital chip, a number in the digital world, like a number 3 is 0011. And I figured out if you put that 0011 on the wire into the TV at the right rate, the television would think it was color. Oh my gosh, nobody ever thought of that. So I said, I don't need a $1,000 circuit, that'd be like $3,000 today at least, a $3,000 circuit to create color on a television, which is how it was done. Operational amps, differential calculus to design it. I could do that too. I knew that side. I just took the number, a number that was in memory, shot it into the TV, and it showed up as color. That was a little startling. Obviously, it was never in any engineering book. It's legal. Nobody did it before or after. And and then I was able to sit down with my basic language and write a game. Game was so important to me. I'd done a couple games for Atari already, and I wrote the game Breakout in color on an Apple II computer with so few statements that were easy to read. I could tell Steve Jobs, change that number to a 6 and the bricks will be blue instead of gray. And wow, we knew that now that games were going to be software for the first time in history. That's the Apple II computer. Games would be software for the first time in history, and a 9-year-old could program them in BASIC. This was going to be a new world. The world of games was going to change forever. And we knew this product was big. It was going to turn out to be the Apple II computer, Apple's only profitable invention for the first 10 years of Apple. In those first 10 years of Apple, everything we tried, we failed as a company. Don't blame me, I refused to go into business. I refused to be business. I said I will only do engineering. Keep me away from any of the politics of business. I don't like stepping on other people's toes and all that stuff. So we, how did we form Apple? Okay, now we had this great product, the Apple II. The Apple I, we're selling a few out of the house, out of the garage. Okay, we're selling a few, but we don't have a company there. We don't have tables for people to sit at. We just had, once in a while, I would show up. Usually Steve was the only person there. And once a week, we'd run down to a store that built our Apple I boards, drive it to the garage, test them, and then drive it to the store and get paid cash. So that was how we ran. So the garage wasn't really much of a company. But now we had the Apple II. We could sell 1,000 of this month. We didn't need any money for the Apple I. We got the parts on 30 days credit, and we got paid cash by the store. Apple II comes along, and that's going to be, how do you get the money to build 1,000 of something? 1,000 of anything in the world. It's a level above what any individuals can do. Started looking for money. Steve was the forerunner on that, and we wound up with an angel named Mike Markkula. We started the company with Mike Markkula's money. Mike Markkula was an adult. The three of us owned equal proportions of Apple computer. Not two kids in a garage. It's Steve Jobs, myself, who kind of knew nothing, and an adult, a businessman, who said, I will run marketing, we will be marketing driven, and we will, one thing, he said, we're gonna charge a high profit because we got a good product. And when you can charge a high profit, you don't have to go and give away parts of your company to get more money. And he taught us, who do you hire and what are their responsibilities? How do you establish a technology company? So he's very important, but very much unheard of. Anyway, the Apple II put us in business. It's starting to go up and up. And I'm gonna cut off here. I'm gonna take questions that come, other questions. I'm gonna take questions more randomly. So if the moderator has any, I could obviously continue for hours, but.
Well, yeah, by a vote of the people, would you like him to continue telling his story?
All right.
All right, well, the people have
Okay, that makes it
spoken.
easy.
Please, continue.
Okay, so here we are with a company making money. Steve and I just assumed you start a company, we were so naive. You start a company and that company remains with the same name, doing something good. As long as you sell stuff and make a profit, it remains forever. We didn't realize in the real world, companies just get bought and sold and disappear, and you have to be pretty major. Well, we started selling some of these Apple II computers that we built. You know, first time ever the computers would have color. First time ever that games would be in color. First time ever that games would be in software. And there were so many other astounding things. It was such an easy machine to add parts onto, software or hardware, very expandable. So we started out, there were a couple competitors, Radio Shack and Commodore. They're building little weak products, little black and white chiclet keyboards. And of course they used more chips and were more expensive to build because I designed the Apple II. And the Apple II used your home TV for color. They had to build little black and white TVs into their dumb products, and they were very cheap. Ours was very expensive. Everyone wanted ours, and we started selling for a while. And then after a while, we started stacking up some boxes in the one office we had, which is about the size of this square. Stacking up some boxes, and we had this little token, like a Monopoly token, maybe a monkey, and that token would go to whoever needed to pay attention. For a while, it had been on operations. We've got a lot of sales going up, and these computer stores are starting around the country. There were about 10 stores, maybe 20, and they wanted to buy our Apple II computer, so we had sales, but operations had to build them. So our president, Mike Scott, who ran operations, had the little monkey to force him. But once we caught up with sales and had a few extra units, the monkey transferred over to Mike Markula in marketing. And it was his job to find the sales and get them sold. And you'd think, well, you could cut your profit, cut your price, but we never did that at Apple. We always believed that we should make enough money that we can have a profit that we can then build better products up, the next generation of product, and keep on going upwards. I didn't really participate on the business end, as I said, just purely in the engineering lab, running engineering, come up with an idea, run in, hook some chips together, test it out. I was building, I had a very strange operating system in this computer that was ROM-based. I had weird little ways of direct input and output to the different devices. I was designing cards that would connect to printers, would connect to modems. I built a unit for the European color television system. I did all myself, and I did, like a guy walks in the door. One guy walked in one day, he said he wondered if I could do one for the Arabic community that spoke Arab. Sure I could. It didn't go through the organization, through Apple Computer. The guy just walked in my office and I programmed up Arabic characters and going from right to left and extending the ends of some words. And these projects were just so much fun. I just did them for fun. Back when I worked at Hewlett-Packard, I had a reputation as a young 20-ish engineer that would do projects for anyone in California for 5 cents. And like, there were no movies in hotels. A guy from Hollywood came up and let me design the digital part of the very first movies in hotel system ever. I mean, I just did these things all the time. Time code systems for televisions, and a lot of different projects going on. So here we are in Apple, and we're almost a year old. We had a staff meeting. 5 of us ran the company for the first couple of years as a staff. Mike Markula in marketing. Mike Scott was our president to oversee that everything was getting attended to that needed. Steve Jobs was learning how to do all the things you do in a company, all the different departments, by asking questions and quizzing them and challenging them and his way of doing things. And I was engineering, and we also hired another engineer, an analog engineer who could make a better power supply than the rest of the world, one of the first switching supplies ever. So that was our team that ran Apple. We had a meeting, and Apple was going to be allowed into the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, Nevada. Okay, and I was young like yourselves. I had heard of Las Vegas. I'd seen pictures of it in movies. Oh my gosh, I would love to go to Vegas. And then Mike Markula, our chairman, announced only 3 people from Apple would be going for marketing. It'd be Mike Markula for marketing, Steve Jobs, and maybe our president, Mike Scott. 3 people going. And I was, I'm too shy to say, hey, I founded the company. Let me go to Las Vegas with you. And I had to think of a purpose. And something weird popped in my head. I raised my hand and I said, what if we have a floppy disk to show so people can type run checkbook, and it runs the checkbook program. Up till then, our programs were on cassette tape. You'd hunt through the cassette tapes and find one labeled checkbook, pop it in a cassette tape player, and read it into your computer. A disk would make sense. Now, I had never worked with any disk hardware or software in my life. And the show was in 2 weeks. But going through my head was I was given permission. If we had a floppy disk, we would show it. If I develop a floppy disk drive in 2 weeks, probably a man-year project for somebody who knows what they're doing, if I can do it in 2 weeks, I will get to go to Las Vegas. Motivation is a lot more important than knowledge. Wanting to do something and being skilled at finding answers that you need to. Well, I sat down, like in my old computer design days, what little bits of logic would get the signals out to a floppy disk and make it work? And they supplied us a floppy disk with 20 chips. I took their 20 chips out and said, who needs them? All you need is the signal that gets written onto the disk and comes back, and then how to step it from track to track. You don't need all those signals. I cut it down, came up with a little board with 8 $1 chips. And I knew that it wasn't really a true floppy disk controller. I didn't know what a floppy disk controller was. I just knew it would read and write data and you could run programs. And why was mine 8 chips and all our competitors had 50 chips? And sometimes one big chip, an expensive one, that was supposed to do the whole job. Why is this? So I went and studied a competitor's design, and then I discovered mine would do everything theirs did and more. Oh my gosh, I was on another one of these great little winners, Genius Project, whatever, and we took it to Las Vegas. I got to go to Las Vegas. I worked every day in those 2 weeks, Christmas Day, New Year's Day. I had a high school programmer that worked with me, Randy Wigington. I taught him how to play craps in Vegas, and he won $35. That's my proudest moment of that trip. But Apple was going into a new world. Now we had a floppy disk drive and the other personal computers didn't. And a program came out called VisiCalc, the very first spreadsheet, like Excel. Imagine a world that had no spreadsheets, no ways to calculate numbers, and make forecasts from January through December. No ways to do that. Every small businessman in the world would go crazy over this in a short time, and they did. They would walk in and spend so much money on an Apple computer and so much money on a program that did their job. VisiCalc it was called. And we had it on a floppy disk now, and our sales shot sky high, 10 times high, and we decided to go public. Some people always say, start a company, you go public, you make a lot of money. And we didn't really want to go public, but the timing was right, and we were already releasing so much information, public financial information, to all the shareholders, the people we'd given stock to. So we went public, and I thought, why going public? I mean, Steve Jobs and I were looking at each other. We've got so much more wealth than our parents ever made in their lives. Why do 3 people at the top who have their name on a sheet of paper, why do 3 people get called founders and they have this infinite wealth, far more than they could ever need in their life? I said, what are founders? They're early people. What about all those people in the Homebrew Computer Club that talked to me, and gave me inspiration and said that what I was doing was great? Some of them were in high school at the time. So I took, basically, of today's dollars, $20 million worth of my own stock and gave it to 5 of those people that were just in the garage days, just around us, because they were there early too. And then I took another $20 million of my own stock and, not get the company to allocate it, and I sold it at a pre-IPO price to all the engineers and marketing people in the company so that the workers of the company, could benefit from such incredible success we had. It's just my feeling. It shouldn't be 3 o'clock. And it still left me far more than I could ever need in life, so I had to figure out ways to get rid of that too. Yeah, museums, divorces, a lot of ways. Okay, so we are very successful, making money. And a lot of people are buying our computer to solve their small business problems with a spreadsheet. And Steve Jobs, more on the business side, the marketing side, says, we should build that version of the Apple II computer. An Apple II with the boards that these people are buying for their business forecasting. Extra memory for larger spreadsheets, and extra characters on a display that an American television can show. 2 boards. We'll build it in, automatically built in as one, and we'll have the floppy disk built in, and it'll be more of a closed machine. Not very expandable. Had to have a new operating system, the Apple III. Well, the Apple II is taking over the world. Largest selling computer in the world, thousands of programs for it to do useful things. A brand new computer, how do you sell it without software? And so the idea was, we'll sell this new computer, the Apple III, with a switch. If the switch is up, and you turn it on, it boots up as an Apple II and runs all those programs. If you have the switch down, it boots up and runs as an Apple III, and it takes different floppy disks. Okay, now marketing, you think an Apple II, that's what all these people are buying. They love to buy an Apple II and extra memory and extra display characters and run their business. Well, marketing had engineering at Apple put in extra chips at extra money. We had to put extra money into the machine to disable the features the businessman wanted in the Apple II. If you booted it up as an Apple II, we had to disable those features with money. We had to put money in so that we would tell them, we'll force them, you want to do your business, you have to go to the Apple III. We didn't attract them to it. There's push and pull. I'm always for pull. You make a product so good that people are attracted. I want this. This is something I want in my life. It does it well. I appreciate it. Or you push them and you say, sorry, you don't have any choice. We just canceled the old model. You have to buy the new one. Sort of how things go today. So that product failed really badly. And it failed for some hardware reasons, some software reasons, and marketing reasons, and never really sold. But every single employee of Apple was forced to have an Apple III on their desk. Not the Apple II that was the highest selling computer in the world. We went for a couple of years like this. Every employee has an Apple III that just isn't selling. Because the executives who dreamed up the Apple III are trying to make it successful, trying to make themselves successful. But they couldn't. It just didn't have what people wanted, buyers wanted. So that was a big failure for marketing reasons. Next, Steve Jobs, myself, and some others went down and visited Xerox PARC, and we saw a computer with a mouse that was working. And I had seen digitizing tablets in my life, so the mouse wasn't that surprising to me. But what it did on a screen, menus could come up, you could have more than one program open, more than one window open on a screen. It's like you have 3 computers in one. Oh my gosh, this is so much more valuable than anyone else's computer. Once you have this, you'll never go back. Well, Steve Jobs doesn't know any computer hardware or software. Anything about operating systems, computer designs, what sort of chips it will take, how much it'll cost, how much memory it'll be needed. He doesn't do that. He just looked at it and he said, you guys are building it for $50,000. We, Apple, are the ones to do it for $1,000 and bring it to the masses. And he worked out some deals with Xerox that traded some technology. And the trouble is, when we built it, it was $10,000. That's 20,000 of today's dollars. $20,000 is not a personal computer. We built it, and half the cost was memory. 1 megabyte of memory cost $5,000 then, which is $10,000 now. So that's what you needed for a GUI computer. And Steve didn't really realize this is what the cost would be. We had the brightest computer engineers from the East Coast computer companies, the West Coast computer companies, people from Xerox that cared about the human interface with computers. And it was a great machine. It had a set of 7 pieces of software for businessmen. Everything was complete. It was just expensive. So Steve Jobs thought they hadn't pulled off the magic they should have with pricing. He walked into meetings in the Lisa building, and he would say, you're a bunch of idiots. You don't know what you're doing. You're worthless. They'd walk out. And what were they to think? Engineers were seeing this. So Steve wasn't too popular, and they kicked him out of the Lisa building. Wouldn't let him in. So he came over to our Macintosh group. I was working on the Macintosh with my best friends in Apple, the most creative people, real good software and hardware thinkers. This little guy did the hardware of the Macintosh, never went to college a day in his life. He was a technician at Apple, and as I presented the structure of the Apple II computer, he learned the design techniques that I had that made it so small, and he started designing his own computers, and he got as good at me at designing computers with very, very few parts. No excess, no middleman parts, and his name was Burl Smith. Anyway, Steve Jobs came over and he thought about taking over this Macintosh group. We were going to do a very unique, different computer than anyone else had ever done, under Jeff Raskin, who brought ease of use of computers to the world more than any other single person. He brought it to Apple. He even he ran the publications department at Apple. And if an engineer came up with something, it worked a certain way, and the manual writers couldn't explain it in English, understandably, the engineers had to go back and redo it. It was not allowed out unless the user of the machine could understand an explanation of how it worked. But Jeff Raskin ran the Macintosh, and Steve took it over from him because Steve wanted to go and make the Lisa at low cost. But he didn't realize the Lisa had an operating system. And the Lisa had a lot of the hardware costs of the amount of RAM to do things right and fast and look normal. So he came over, he took over the Macintosh, and instead of building a computer, he built a program that looked like a computer. He knew in his eyes what he wanted to see in the world, how he wanted it to work and operate. He could think that out really well, but he couldn't understand what was the importance of an operating system that allocated resources in a structured fashion. This machine would only have to be like the Apple II. Run one program for one user at a time, and we will put a lot of little routines into ROM that are pre-written that we can call an operating system because it's partly done. We had that in the Apple II as well. And at the same time, we had the Apple II up with a mouse, running in color even. But Steve Jobs didn't want to hear about the Apple II. He called the Apple II engineers. I was in the Apple II division when I came back, called them all bozos, put them in a building far from the campus, and just only the Macintosh will reign. But the Macintosh was very weak, and not having an operating system was going to burn us and burn us and burn us forever and force us to need one in a later year and buy it back from Steve Jobs' next company, which is kind of a funny end of a different part of the story. Well, so I had an airplane crash, and I got hit hard, and I wasn't forming memories for 5 weeks. And when I came out of that amnesia, I talked myself out of it with logic one night. I phoned up Steve Jobs and I said, the Macintosh group, the most creative people in Apple, my best friends, the youngest thinking ones, they'll do fine. I don't have to be there. I'm gonna go back to college for my last year of college. And my name was famous, so I went back to Berkeley under the name Rocky Raccoon Clark. And that's what it says on my Berkeley diploma. So, but anyway, so the Macintosh came out a very, very closed machine. It would only be allowed to have what Steve Jobs could see and define. Wasn't really that too open to the world. The other engineers tried to sneak in things like test ports. Well, Macintosh came out and it was our biggest failure ever. The Apple III had failed, the Lisa had failed for cost, and the Macintosh failed. There was no software for it. There was nothing you could do with it. Just a couple dinky little pieces of software, and business people were buying computers right and left, but they needed software to do their jobs. So the Macintosh sales fell to 500 a month. Our stock dropped in half in about a week. When you're a big company stock valuations don't drop that fast, ever. So it was kind of scary times, and the company had to decide what to do. Steve Jobs just said, cut all the money for the Apple II marketing, and people will start buying the Macintosh, but they wouldn't have bought it without the software. And everyone on the board of directors realized this, and Steve tried to fire our CEO that was going the right way, and that failed. John Sculley was his name. And the board of directors voted that John Sculley was right, and Steve was now in a bad situation. He was relieved of Macintosh marketing responsibilities. We had to work for 3 years and put a lot of hard work into making our Macintosh computer successful enough to take the place of the Apple II. So the people that Steve Jobs disdained are the ones that made it successful. We believed in the Macintosh. We believed it was the future. Believed in the way Steve Jobs introduced it. It's just that it takes time to build a market, to send reps to every university and every company that might buy 50 or more computers. We had to pay Microsoft to write a spreadsheet for it. We had to pay other developers to get some software going. And after about 3 years, it was able to catch up with the falling Apple II sales and eventually keep our company rolling, but at no size larger than it had been with our Apple II, our starting product. The product we had before we even raised any money. So the Macintosh was a bad experience. Now, Steve Jobs could have stayed at Apple. He was not kicked out. He was not fired from Apple. He could have been funded millions and millions of dollars, as he had been with the Apple III and the Lisa and the Macintosh, the 3 failures. He could have been funded millions of dollars to do anything he wanted, his next computer, to any city in the world, anywhere he wanted to be. But when you've had a fight with the board of directors, you've had a fight with kind of your bosses and the higher ups in the company, and you've lost, you can't stick around. You really can't stick around and work with them. So he felt he had a need to create computers, and it was really going to be music devices where he'd really make his stay, but he thought that's what was in him, and he had to leave Apple to be able to do it, and he was right. So that was good. Steve Jobs, while he was away, our Macintosh computer sold well and kept our company about the same level it had always been. Nothing exciting, nothing new, nothing shooting upwards. And so Steve Jobs really matured. He had another computer that failed, the next computer. But he had some good employees, hardware and software, and Apple was in the dumps. We got to the place where our Macintosh computers were crashing several times a day. I would use mine and would crash. I would just drag a file into a folder, crash. I would hit return in a word processor, crash, have to restart the computer. And this was happening because the Macintosh, as I pointed out earlier, never had an operating system. It never had such things as memory protection. And I discovered, before we bought Next, I discovered on my own by accident, if you ran Internet Explorer as your browser, which everyone had to do because Microsoft had made sure that they put all sorts of weird things into their browser language, that any website that developed to work with theirs wouldn't work with Netscape and other browsers. So almost everyone used Internet Explorer. If you used Internet Explorer, your Mac would crash all day long in other programs. Nobody in Apple realized this. I discovered it by accident. My younger son, who was gifted, switched to a little tiny browser, tiny footprint. I like things that are small, little memory. It was from Europe. It was from Germany. It was called iCab. You can get iCab to this day. It was kind of beautiful. You could click a button in iCab and it would print out a list of the HTML errors. You'd click on an error and it would take you to the code and show you where it was. I loved that browser. The first day I switched to it, I came to bed with my wife with my little Apple Duo, and I said, it's weird, it hasn't crashed all day. It never happens. It didn't crash the next day, and the next day, and the next day. And it could usually go weeks before I restart it once. And I should have been smarter. We were running, a lot of us were running servers. I was running servers at home because I could afford a high-speed line like a university. Servers for famous rock groups, servers for companies, servers for famous hackers even. Running these servers all on Macintosh with no firewalls turned on. I programmed the routers myself. No firewalls. Macintosh not having an operating system just wasn't vulnerable. They never got attacked, they never crashed, but they ran for weeks and months. A server never runs Internet Explorer. I still urge somebody could go back and recreate those that year, long time ago, that operating system on the Mac and could get and try Internet Explorer and see if it had anything in it that was deliberately crashing other programs. Frankly, I think it was just, they were such lousy programmers. It was crashing and it was just badly written. Well, I did not like any of the early Windows or up to a stage. It was horrible compared to the Macintosh for friendliness, but that was my own opinion. I don't have the same negative opinion about Android, for example. I don't like to take sides and say something's good because it's Apple. No, something's good because it does good things for you. That's how I always want to think, like an engineer would. Anyway, we're back, and Steve Jobs comes back. We buy his operating system, and our stock stayed at the same level it had been in the Apple II days. And Steve Jobs hugged a new computer, and our sales didn't go up, and we were the same size. And Steve Jobs introduced a new operating system, and we were the same size. Then came the iPod, the music device that changed music so much more than everybody trying to find a formula to get MP3s in your hand. You could now have 1,000 of them. More than that, Steve Jobs was not a computer person. He did not want computer type stuff. A file, number of megabytes, transferred from here to there, writing any code was ridiculous to Steve, which is good for humans. So you plug your new iPod into the computer and all the songs come to your iPod. You don't have to sit there and take an effort dragging things on a screen. That was a beautiful, beautiful machine. I had mine, I gave it a fair test against Sony mini discs and against a RAM-based one called the Diamond Rio 500, and within a couple of hours, I knew that nothing was going to beat this iPod. It was so good, the first one. Steve Jobs did an unusual thing. We started our company with my Apple II computer, and I think the reason that Steve Jobs always opposed openness was the Apple II was totally open. Every hardware, software published, every way to do anything, there was nothing holding you back from anything. And I think partly he wanted his own success. Well, with the iPod, he went open. He had us write iTunes, the Apple Music program, for Windows, as well as the Macintosh. So now, everyone in the world, if you owned a Macintosh or a Windows machine, you could buy an iPod. The sales for Apple doubled. The revenues doubled, the profits doubled, and our stock doubled. That was the first increase. That was Steve Jobs' Apple II. The board gave him billions of dollars in stock and jet airplanes for having really brought Apple from where it had been to something new in life. And of course it kept going up, with our iTunes music sales, a song for 99 cents. And Steve had such a good platform such a good foundation, like legs of a chair for the company. Everything was in place and every cylinder was working. And so we were ready for a lot more of the increases. Our retail stores, extremely successful. The iPhone, as Steve Jobs micromanaged the iPhone to get every little detail right. You have to imagine a world that there were some smartphones. There was no phone that was all glass display, and you actually typed on the glass to type in things, and you had ways to edit mistakes on a small screen. They'd never been done, these things. But Steve wanted it exactly right for his use, but not very open. And turns out that the iPhone was for himself. The Apple II that I designed, with its game abilities built in, was something I wanted all my life for myself. The Tesla automobile was what Elon Musk wanted for his life. What engineer would think of building an electric car large? Elon had 5 kids. He needed a large car. The supercharger stations that make the Tesla drive anywhere in the world. I have driven mine to Phoenix and back multiple times, and my wife is driving in today, and we'll drive back in it. We've driven it all the way to Kansas and back, 3,600 miles. What makes that work is superchargers on the road, fast chargers, quick DC quick charge. And the first 6 Tesla superchargers were between Elon Musk's home in Bel Air up to the factory in Fremont, California. In other words, the superchargers were something he would need to be able to go a long distance. And now what it's worked out to is you can drive anywhere in the country in that car, but he was designing it for his own life. And that's where you get some of the great products and the great breakthroughs. So the iPhone, I used to be asked, what are the greatest products that influence your life the most from Apple? And I usually would go to, well, it's the Apple II or the iPhone? And then I started saying the iPhone is just so great as it improved over time. And you know, we got high bandwidth on cellular, and we got, you know, mobile data, and we got all the social web and all that. I would say the iPhone, but now I give a different answer. What has changed my life the most, that I think, how would I have done it without this, is the App Store for the iPhone. The apps that I run, every app I run, oh my gosh, what would I have done without these apps? It would have just taken me like weeks or days, huge amounts of physical effort. So opening it up to going open, it's another way that we went open. Few little occasions to go open. When it's the right timing, work out really good, and when you're not open, you can make very good products anyway. That's all I'm going to say for now, because we have a lot of questions, and I'm sure that we have some question time, and we can talk about the future, we can talk about what it all meant, but I'd rather be open to your questions than me just going on my own rant. Thanks.
Thank you. Let's have a big round of applause. Not you. Just kidding. No, just a few administrative things, because first I want to thank Jade Silva for setting all of this up logistically, so let's have a nice round of applause. And to Brett Siebold, if he's here. Oh, there he is. Just when you think he's not here, he is here. So, how many of you are entrepreneurs? That's it? Now I'm just going to tell you that...
I think we're seeing more of the engineering school than the business school.
All right, well, good point. I do teach entrepreneurial mindset for engineers, and I encourage every single engineer to think entrepreneurially. And I think, to your point, Steve, about marketing, without marketing, your ideas are just not going to get into people's hands. So as you consider the development of what you're doing technically, you always have to think about the commercial dimension at some point, and I believe you recommend prototyping and then selling?
Well, I recommend having a working model, at least a visual representation that somebody you're trying to get money from can operate and see, because you'll own more of what you have and it'll be more obvious how it works and that it really is good and nice. Don't just write ideas down on paper and try to sell those. No. So always make sure you've got some engineering talent with you as you're forming your first small group. You need a business thinking. You got to be successful, or you're not going to get the product to the world. People often ask me, would you or Steve Jobs have been successful without the other? Well, I would have designed my product. I don't know. There were people at Hewlett-Packard who said the Apple II was the best thing they ever saw, and I'm sure that other people would have been willing to fund it. But you know what? I was young and I was shy. And friends meant more than anything. I wouldn't do it with anyone but my friend Steve Jobs. I'd sold stuff with him before. But so it might not have ever seen the light of day and changed the world, and eventually somebody else might have thought of those ideas. Would Steve Jobs have been successful on his own? A lot of people want to say yes, but with millions of dollars, whereas I had $0 to develop this Apple II that was all of Apple's revenues for the first 10 years, Steve had millions of dollars and just failed on projects. So starting on his own, that might have been a failure too. When you start a company with entrepreneurship for young people didn't exist before personal computers. Companies in Silicon Valley spun off other companies. There was a venture community that would fund people who already knew what they were doing to start a new company doing a similar thing. Young people coming out of college, the only reason that was possible, things like Facebook being created in a dorm and Bill Gates and Paul Allen out of Harvard, was we stumbled onto something that we could realize had to be worth a lot. And yet the big companies thought it wasn't going to be worth money. So they didn't jump in that direction. And so now all of a sudden the idea was young people thinking different, not being, here's how it's always done. I'm coming from a company, but being willing to try and take risks with new things. I mean, even our ideas for the start of personal computers, those ideas probably would have failed. The thing is, we had a platform and it was open to other people to think up things like VisiCalc, the spreadsheet, and make it successful for us. So a lot of things you can't think of can happen that can make a market. But you need business, marketing, and engineering, and it could be in one person, it could be in two people, it could be in three, but you need somebody who really wants to have a company, because that's the only way you're going to get to a lot of people, and somebody who's going to raise the money. And marketing understands the end user. I pointed out earlier, the best marketing of all is not if you think, will people like my idea? It's, do I desperately want it for myself? Like Elon Musk and the Tesla, Steve Jobs and the iPhone the way it came out, myself and the Apple II. If you desperately want it for yourself, you're gonna have a lot better insight than market research and assumptions and guesses and all that stuff. And don't forget to include the engineers in your startup. Engineers solve problems all day long. Working on hard mathematical, sometimes logical tracks and trying to find a mistake in something. They're used to coming up with better ideas than you would have thought of in your own business plan as the business person. So don't forget the engineer.
Yeah, well,
A lot of people like to say, I'll write a business plan. I went to business school and I'll go out and see a bunch of venture capitalists, and if I get it funded, then I'll go hire some engineers, I don't know, in India or somewhere.
well, that's a great answer. And one of the good things about our university is our engineers win most of the entrepreneurial competitions. So we're doing something right here, and all of you should be applauding yourself.
Yeah, by the way, your goal in your head, you might say, God, I hope someday I get to be an entrepreneur. I get to be in a startup and do something new things. Some people are like that, and and really they want to find the interesting things in life. But when you're right out of college, what's the most important thing to you? It's having an income for your apartment. So, I worked for Hewlett Packard, and I had a regular income, and I could afford an apartment. And in the evenings, I would think out my own projects and do them for people all over California. And I'd build my computers for fun because I didn't waste away the free time I had. When you're young, your mind is working faster and your body can stay up later than any other time.
So what do you suppose would have happened if Mike, your marketing guy, didn't show up when he did?
If Mike hadn't shown up when he did, we would have found somebody else to put in money to create this Apple II computer. And it's hard to say if the person that we found was as good or less than Mike Marco. Mike Marco was really perfect. He believed in us. He believed that this was going to be the next big market that starts maybe once every 10 years, a new market, and then all of a sudden in 5 years you got a $500 million company. Now it would be $1 billion. So at least he believed in us. And I remember when we introduced this Apple II computer, a little show, just hobbyists and people. We didn't have any for sale, yet, but we introduced it, and like, good Lord, I had jokes running on it. They would ask you your name and then make the jokes in that ethnicality, because it was before political correctness. But Mike, and we walked out of that show, and had a lot of fun there. Mike Marco put his arm around me. He said, we're going to do it. We're going to be that big, that quick. So he knew things we didn't know, because Steve and I had no business experience.
And so find the right partner. That's critical. Have passion for what you're doing, and make sure you understand yourself and how you want to impact the world with your technology. And a lot of it is probably to some degree serendipity. Would you agree or disagree?
Well, serendipity makes me think of something. Let's say you're playing cards in Las Vegas. You're playing blackjack. What's a great superpower you might have? Seeing through cards? No. Luck. Luck is the greatest superpower of all. Stan Lee will tell you that every time. Now, I pull out my iPhone and I run the apps, and I realize I have more power with that than any superpower in the movies. So that's how I feel. So we've really brought the world a lot of that. So luck, serendipity, being in the right place at the right time. I was going to build a great computer in that year. As soon as the price was made it possible, the price of the building materials made it possible for a person to afford a good computer, I was going to build it. The fact that that was the right year with Moore's Law and the taking off of things, it was going to be the huge drive in our economy for the next 30, 40 years. I had no idea of that. So that was just a lot of good timing. And look, do what you believe in, what you're good at, and do it well. That's one thing. Every one of my designs, I tried to think of tricks that would not be in any book that nobody else would think of. Here's how you design it. Is there anything I could change to make it one tiny bit better? Take out one part that's not needed here even, and be better than anyone else in the world. I always thought that back in those early days.
All right, so luck is, preparation meeting opportunity, and just randomness all kind of combined together. But that's a
But
great
I did so many things that made me happy, and they were just little fun projects, weren't worth any money, big companies, but every one of them that I did, by trying to make them excellent, my mind learned methods of design.
So this notion of happiness, and apparently that's been your path for.
Oh, I don't need Apple Computer at all.
Yeah.
I had my formula for happiness by the time I was about 20 years old. Your personality settles in between ages 18 and 23. I would walk along home from high school even. I'd start thinking out, what sort of person should I be? How should I treat others? How should I be in life? What should I be like? And I figured out happiness. I could die being real successful at running a bunch of companies or something, and all day long, keeping things running in order and calling people up and demanding this and so on. I could do that, or I could just be on the street telling jokes with friends, and maybe not even have an income, and I'd be happy, smiling all the time. And I decided that's the person I would rather be on the day I die. So I came up with a formula. Happiness is what life's about, and my formula, H equals S minus F. Happiness equals smiles minus frowns. Smiles, do things that are fun. Frowns, don't care to the end of the world when things don't go your way. Don't have to ever argue with anybody. You're only going to walk away frowning if you argue with somebody. If your car gets scratched, you can say, cars get scratched. I do it all the time. And so I had my formulas for happiness, and I didn't need any Apple computer to be as happy as I am and as well off today as I would ever be. Now, I did change my formula a little bit in a later year. After Steve Jobs didn't like, I put on some rock concerts, and he said, that's not me, computers are me. So I changed it to include the fun element. And my formula was H equals F cubed. F is a metaphor for the necessities of life, is the first thing you need for happiness. So happiness equals, H equals F cubed. Happiness equals food is the metaphor for the necessities, fun, and friends. Those were the important things, that got me to where I got. Food, fun, and friends. And then I was being inducted into my high school Hall of Fame, and the students started laughing. And I said, oh, I was embarrassed. There might be a fourth F.
Wow. Okay. Wow, Woz. All right. Well, as the song says, clap your hands if you think happiness is the truth, because that's an important part of life. It isn't just all the stuff you're doing. So we're going to open up the audience for questions, and Brent and Jade will be walking around. So whoever.
Such an amazing speaker.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Pooja. I'm in Ken's class. Okay.
Excuse me, I'm going to sit for a couple minutes
Okay, yeah, sure.
until it's a little bit of a pinched nerve that goes away.
That's fine. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. So my question is, you were saying you built Apple II for yourself, and like Steve Jobs built iPod for himself, and so on. So, and in lean startup methodology, we learned that we learn the customers, we learn what they want. So if I have something that I really want to build, but that's not what the customers want, so what do I do then? Is it about how I sell, or do I just give up and build what the customer wants?
Find one of the people that really desperately wants it, something different from before, some improvement, and be a partner with them. I'm suggesting you always try to find somebody in your team that don't necessarily trust, here's what I think people want, or here's what market research says. When you have somebody that's in a market, maybe it's a certain kind of music, they'll know what's good and what's not, and an outsider might not, that's not into that type of music.
Okay, thank you. All right, we'll take a question back here.
Hey, John Kellen here from Tucson. And first I'll just acknowledge what you've done for the world. You're a hero of mine, and I think case in point, word of mouth. I was thinking you wanted to advertise to get here, but having said that, I love what you were saying about collaboration and opening it up, and your big heart as opposed to something that's just looking at a narrow focus. I come from the business world and from Thunderbird and Global and entrepreneur, and I work with a lot of people here at the Polytechnic campus. And, I just love what's going on with ASU and the different departments. And the question is, about collaboration, and there's these different silos within academia. You've got the Fulton School of Engineering, you've got Polytechnic, you've got WP Carey. We've had a conversation around how can we collaborate and bring everybody together, and kind of what you talked a little bit about, maybe talk a little bit about the Apple ecosystem and when you were working with the guys that you loved and you were really working that you had a purpose. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit on what your ideas going forward about creating companies and including things and including others in that thought process to help? I mean, now with technology.
I'll cut you short. I'm not a businessman, and I don't do hiring, and I was very shy around the time we started Apple. So how do you go out and meet the other sort of people that would have the disciplines you need to have a good, successful company and product? You need friends. You don't have a reason for doing almost anything in the world unless you have some friends that at least influenced by the ideas. And what can I say? It's kind of dumb to say just go look for them or post things online, go looking for people that might be near you. I'll tell you one thing, for the engineer, sometimes you got people that got great grades. They can solve a lot of engineering problems and write the programs. But sometimes you find a guy that might not have ever gone to college even, but has built things. Builder, maker, makes things, gets projects finished all the way to completion. He's used to doing that. Maybe didn't get great grades if they went to the university. But that person is the sort of person that I'd want to do any startup with. Somebody can sit down, buy some parts, wire them up themselves, make it work, demonstrate, make some motors on it, whatever. So I don't know, otherwise keep an open mind. Yeah, collaboration, working with other people. I mentioned the disciplines of business, marketing, and engineering. That's the starting point. Obviously, it spreads out once you have a company if you're making any money.
Hey Steve, my name's Lonnie. It's great to see you again after NextCon. So my question is, as an engineer/entrepreneur, do you think college is worth it?
Well, you know what? It's funny, but in almost all of my work experience at Hewlett-Packard and at Apple, that nothing I learned in school, all the mathematics and the calculus and everything, never really got applied, except when I designed that floppy disk controller. The data's coming from a disk, signals going up and down in voltage. How do you determine what ones and zeros are based on the timing? You need some smart little device like a microprocessor, a brain. And I went back to one of my courses at Berkeley, a graduate course in back in those days, finite state machines. And I realized I can make the finite state machine tiny little properties to get one signal in, figure out what's going on with time. I could do it with two little $1 chips, the register and a little, what's called a ROM. And I forgot the question.
Do you think college is worth it?
College, okay. Now that was an application from a college course, and I'm very, very proud of that, that I got something from Berkeley. But the methodology, one thing is college, you learn how to solve large problems and work on them to conclusion to answers. And that's the way that you come about that. You're going to do that for the rest of your life, even though it's different examples. You may not use the same mathematics even, or the same, may not even work on the same project that you studied in college. So it's arbitrary. I can't say it's essential and absolutely needed. As I pointed out, I'm the one who went back and got my degree. So I can tell my kids I went to a college. It's a lot of time I put in my life. I didn't want to throw it away, and say, I didn't need it. Sometimes you run into a person that says, well, maybe they're talking about their son, or maybe it is the son or daughter, and they have two choices: to go to the university and study this, they want to be an entrepreneur, or to get involved with a startup that's starting right now, one that they're sort of excited about. And my advice is usually go with the startup. That should be, you can always get back to school to get regular academic education. Now to me, I always felt schools were important, and an important part of my life, and I went back and honored every school I ever went to as much as I could. I even thought every teacher I had was smart, almost every teacher. And usually smart people don't say that. So.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jessica.
Hi.
So I work very closely with both UI UX designers and engineers at my internship. And so I was wondering, how did you bridge that gap between two different mindsets? So the designing mindset, the engineering mindset, the business mindset to the engineering mindset. What's your best piece of advice, or how are you able to communicate best with Jobs, for example?
Well, Jobs was sort of the type of director that on his project, let's take the Macintosh, And although I say it failed for a lot of business and marketing errors, but he had to have it a certain way that he had vision for, and designers had to design it that way, so he was the UI. Meanwhile, people like Andy Hertzfeld, who wrote the early software for the Macintosh, he had a mindset too of the user making things easy and obvious and intuitive. When we developed our Lisa computer, we had people that came from Xerox PARC Center. Many of them came from the education community, from university education or other, and they only thought about communicating with users. That was what the Xerox PARC was all about. The mouse, the GUI, it was that you could look at things and it would look at a screen and it would be intuitive what to do. What does this icon that looks like a paint bucket do? Well, it paints, it gives you paint. What does this icon that looks like a brush do? It brushes. So a lot of that thinking came in from people who know nothing about computers, should be able to walk up and use it. And in those days, you had to be a computer expert and read a big manual and maybe type in commands. The Macintosh was a big step. What was the Lisa computer? Was a big step in that direction. After Steve Jobs took over the Macintosh, he kind of envisioned things the way he wanted, and they had a good fundamental starting of being much easier than anything we were used to in the computer world. We were selling that over memorizing commands. I mean, to this day, I hate memorizing how to go to apps and click where on my finger on a smartphone. I hate to do that. I hate the structure. I just want to speak a thought out of my mouth. So I'm glad that we've gotten to that point. So I don't know, whatever. But we had good developers. A good developer, the engineer themselves, should also be thinking about user experience, and it shouldn't be, oh, it comes very tightly from a creative department. This is how it has to be. I don't believe that. I think the engineer should have the leeway to decide a lot of the choices too, or at least put their feelings forth and be respected. Engineers should be respected more than they are.
Hi, my name is Kaylee Johnson. I love you on Dancing with the Stars, by the way.
I don't watch television. I have never seen ballroom dancing in my life. Took a year trying to talk me into it. That was the hardest thing. Yeah, I lost 5 inches on my belt.
Oh, wow.
6 weeks preparing one first dance.
Oh my God.
So, how could a geek like me get on that show? How fun. Amazing.
Well, it was a great tour. I'm actually from the School of Earth and Space Exploration here at ASU. My question is about collaborative processes. You said it was really important to work with your friends. And how do you navigate having a creative, collaborative group that's productive? And how do you navigate having a working relationship with your friends and being able to keep that productive?
Okay. Well, there's two states. Startup, you want to have a group. You want to pick a few friends, but the same principle is going to apply. If you're in a business, who do you pick to collaborate? How do you work on ideas? Maybe it's UI versus the engineering versus some marketing business. How do you get it all to work together? And it turns out there is no answer. You can't make it work together. Personalities, I mentioned personalities, get in the way. A lot of personalities don't get along. You might even have the same knowledge background, but you just approach life in a different way. And so when projects work very well, it's usually because everybody is getting along. If somebody comes home and says they like their job, I will say almost always they like the people around them. It's not really what that job does. If they were in the same job with the wrong people, they would come back saying they hate it. Hewlett-Packard, we actually had classes talked on, but some personalities are very soft and don't want to interrupt others, and some personalities are drivers, and certain types don't work out together. But if you understand the other personalities, you can work around it. But then again, working around it is a personality trait. You don't change after 23 years old. People don't change. So always try to find find something wrong with a group that the people just don't quite get along, talk the same language the same way. But there's no sure answer. Sometimes it's assigned to you. What's my favorite programming language? I grew up scientifically. So at the time we started Apple, I'd only programmed in Fortran, PL1, and Algol. And there was this little kid's language called BASIC. And you know what? And Bill Gates and Paul Allen had written a BASIC for the Intel microprocessor, and I had my microprocessor, and I sniffed the wind. There's a book called 101 Games in BASIC. So even though I had never used that language, I said, I've got to write a BASIC. I went to Hewlett-Packard at night, and I went through taking notes in a BASIC manual, Hewlett-Packard BASIC. I didn't realize Hewlett-Packard BASIC is not the same language as Digital Equipment BASIC, that all the games were written in. But hey, I didn't know anything. So I wrote a language that I had never even used in my life. In later terms in life, yeah, I played with Lego. I never really liked it much. It's like you get a little bit of a direction logo. You get a little bit of a direction of moving a turtle around, and you couldn't take it to a real, full, useful program level. We had one in Apple, a very unusual language called AppleScript. AppleScript, you wrote a command, you said tell a certain program in the computer that was AppleScript compatible. They wrote their own stuff in. Tell it to do these things. But you didn't know what the whole language was. What are the verbs and the nouns? What are the commands? What are the operands and what are the objects and the operators that you can use in these commands? Every language that got installed, every program you installed a program on your Macintosh, it informed AppleScript of what its vocabulary was. So you, a user, could say, or the programmer could go down and say, what's the vocabulary of this program? Oh, and now I know how to tell it to create a new window and add this to it and copy it over there and send it somewhere in email. But you could send your commands to one program at a time. Each one had their own language. So each one, they could have the same exact command, could do two different things depending on which one you were talking to. When Siri came out, it was an app that you could buy a year before Apple had it on the iPhone. An app. I bought the app. And it's the greatest thing in the world. I built crowd after crowd after crowd. The only person I ever talked into buying Siri was my wife. You know, and I could go, what are the 5 largest lakes in California? I could get answers from Wolfram Alpha. That was just a great thing. So the week that Apple bought Siri, I'd say, what are the 5 largest lakes in California? I'd get all this lakefront real estate stuff cramming in my face. I'd say, what are the prime numbers greater than 87? Joe's Prime Rib Place. But right then, that first experience, though, it was going to improve. I said, Apple should do it like AppleScript. You should speak the name of one of your apps, and now you're talking to that app. If it built in all to accept words, what words would it accept? And I waited and waited and waited, and it took Apple, I don't know how many years, till just recently, they sort of have it partway in the HomeKit and in autoplay. You can speak some commands to apps you like, kind of like Alexis. I'm not going to go that way. Okay. Well, it would take too long. It would take too long to keep going. So
Hi, Steve.
that's one language. I wrote a lot of programs in my life. I did a lot of programming in C. I'd like an AppleScript front end for user interface, and then call C programs to do the calculation real quickly, like figure out word problems for the newspaper and things like that. And I got to a point that I tested many little program ideas, like solve puzzles, fun things young people might want to do. Solve a certain puzzle. And I tested it in Logo, kind of an Englishish language you could make it into. AppleScript was kind of Englishish, and I tested it in a language called HyperTalk from Apple's HyperCard program, which had links before the internet, just a little before the internet, just didn't reach the internet, but it had links between its own cards. And every single time, the HyperTalk example was shorter, more direct English to what it really was doing, and ran faster. That was probably my favorite language of all.
Hi, Steve. Right here on your right side. You've obviously done so many things in your life, and it's kind of like a need for you to just do things for fun. I just want mine's a really simple question. What's next on your bucket list?
It's funny. I kind of only had one thing on my bucket list ever since my daughter was in high school, and that was to walk her down the aisle. And I did it last month. And I remember my own wedding vows. A-E-I-O-U. Anyway, I have had another set of bucket lists, strange ones over time. I traveled a lot, but I want to see Ayers Rock. I want to go to Tasmania, Australia, and I want to go to Romania, Bucharest, and I want to go to Kiev in the Ukraine. I don't know why. Those 4 places just caught my attention over years, and I have no explanation for it. But no, real simple. No big bucket list. I want to work on this kind of product and all that. I'm actually busy doing a lot of things. I'm putting on Comic-Con, Silicon Valley Comic-Con. And it's the greatest event. We brought more science and technology into our Comic-Con than any other. We were the most successful event ever last year in San Jose Convention Center, the highest attendance. The city is opening up 4 buildings and shutting off streets, parks for us this year. And so that's one thing I'm doing. I'm working on optimizing a company, primary data, to optimize virtual storage in data centers. So some technology. And mostly I go around public speaking all over the world because it's fun to travel, meet people in different cultures and different occupations.
All right, Ken, we'll have you pick our last question.
Okay.
No pressure.
Hey Steve, thank you for coming. My name is Patrick, and I wanted to ask you also more of a more general life question or possibly personal question. What is a mistake or a misstep that you made in your career or life, and how did you learn and overcome that experience?
First of all, I have my philosophies that I developed around age 20. Say, you don't go back and look at something and say, I wish I'd done it differently, or I learned, or I think you're getting something that I sort of regretted or wished I'd done differently. And then I'd be frowning. So I don't believe in that. I sure look at a mistake I made in letting Bill Gates come in with a floating point basic to replace ours instead of going with my own that I was writing, because we got a 5-year license. 5 years later, the Apple II was all of our revenues, and we had to relicense it, so they had us. All my stuff in Apple turned out to A+. Every idea I thought of for a job, I don't even know if I can do this. I don't even know if I can find a way to tell where the bytes start and stop on the data that's coming off a disk. I didn't know if it was possible. I thought I might fail. And every one of them, somehow I succeeded. I had 10 years of just magic coming out of my head. I go back and look at my own designs, and I can't figure out how a human thought of those things. In later life, I had some startups, though, that were unable to achieve the engineering goals. Had some good marketing ideas, but they couldn't be achieved on the engineering side. And so some of those were failures, or we had to take the product in a different direction.
So when those ideas failed, you learned from it by taking it in a different direction?
Yeah, well, my failures are, even with very clever approaches to the engineering, coming up with too high a price, too large a size, and too short a battery life. Those sort of failures. There's nothing you can do. So then, you can find out another way that the electronics work, and some radio-based stuff, and so we found other sources. Other customers.
Thank you.
All right. Wow, great questions. We have an aphorism in entrepreneurship. It's pivot or persevere. You have to keep going until you can, and then you figure out where the next direction is. So innovation, aspiration, inspiration, you just keep going and follow your passion. I think that's the critical piece.
And it's less important what you learn, but wanting. Starting out with a want. I want to get there, and what am I going to have to get there? The motivation is much more important. I know that from teaching.
Everybody, who here is motivated? Woo! Good. Well, that's funny. The enthusiasm behind that really doesn't, I don't feel it. I mean, not that I should, but it would be nice if you actually expressed it. So, who here is motivated? Yeah! That's better. That's better.
All right,
Now,
we'd like to do a group picture. So you all stay where you're at, and we will have Steve go to the front, and our photographer, we're going to get a ladder. So everybody try and squish in to those that are sitting into the chairs. So if you're around the perimeter, we'll go ahead and do a group picture before we close.
before that picture, though, are there any of my